As if you had just finished a marathon in a dream, you feel exhausted when you wake up. As light streams in through the window, an unfamiliar weight, a weight that doesn't quite fit, sits heavy on your chest. Silently sipping your coffee, you gaze out at a world that seems far away, as if you exist in it but are also separate from it. As you go about your day, you answer questions, nod, and show care with a smile that seems to be stitched into your habit. On the other hand, a subtle pain and draw toward an unfathomable mystery. No emotion is too great for you to handle. Still, you have no idea what is rightfully yours. Some people think it's sensitive. Some people think it's too sentimental, so they've written it off. But you know, in your heart, that's not all. You don't merely experience the same emotions as other people. It is with you that you bear it. You make room for all people, on occasion, to the point where you vanish entirely. For empaths, this is the invisible scar. Furthermore, the complexity surpasses what the general public perceives. Rather than describing an empath as a emotionally charged character, but also as a conduit, a mental link, via which the collective's unspoken, unseen, and unresolved energies flow. He envisioned an empath as someone who takes on the pain of another without knowing it's their own. Furthermore, that obliviousness can transform into a spiritual weakness. A person who is sensitive but has not yet attuned to their own depths can end up holding on to things that do not rightfully belong to them. Insomnia, irritability, and lethargy are common side effects, lacking background information and gradually losing touch with their inner self. Do you remember a time when you felt heavier as you left a room than when you entered it? Sat with someone and then left feeling sad for no apparent reason? Feelings that are powerful and vivid, but whose origin you can't always pin down, can sometimes surge up inside you like waves from an invisible ocean. Perhaps you were never really the owner of them. Perhaps you have been reflecting the suffering of others without even realizing it. And here's where the risk comes in. Reason being, when you're unaware of the source of your feelings, you start to unravel your sense of self. A crack opens up in you. Not only does love seep into you through that opening, but so do sorrow, terror, and unfulfilled shadows. This is not a euphemism. Yes, it is a fact of psychology. Compassion is more than just a virtue. This ability requires guidance, comprehension, and, most importantly, protection. You are more vulnerable to the archetypal forces Jung forewarned us about when you are unconscious. Other factors that do not intrinsically wickedness, but it can fester in the minds of the naive. Even though empaths are frequently lauded for their kindness, their vulnerability can sometimes lead them astray. But where does it originate from if the emotion you're experiencing isn't your own? And most importantly, are you experiencing its effects, or is it subtly dominating you? Music, it starts softly, gently, like fog rolling in over calm water, a merging of emotions that doesn't shout its arrival. It seems like love at first. You can't help but be captivated by the presence of someone whose broken spirit and hidden sorrow, whose existence trembles like a candle battling the wind, concealed behind insincere laughter. Not only do you want to console them, but you also want to bear their pain and help them mend the pieces that life has broken in them. Then you feel a nudge from within, a feeling that this is genuine care and compassion. However, there's more going on behind the scenes, an unspoken agreement being formed in the stillness. That person who says, "I will bleed for your healing if it means I don't have to face my own emptiness." Carl Jung warned us that empathy without consciousness becomes openness to the subconscious. A graceful bridge is not always the case. It can be a portal through which other people's unfinished business, masquerading as intimacy, can flood in. When an empath is vulnerable, they fail to see the invasion for what it is. They feel a bond in the pain. Without recognizing that the darkness has crept in disguised as love, they react instinctively to the emotional upheaval and reach out. And the more severe the other's wound, the more powerful the attraction evolves into. Why? Because experiencing pain makes them feel valued. Additionally, the fear of being unnoticed is lessened when one feels needed. Envision a lady who rescues a partner in her hour of need. A man whose soul bears the scars of a troubled youth, whose melancholy is like an empty room and whose anger is hidden beneath their charisma. Rumor has it that she can see his potential. She holds the firm belief that her love will illuminate his path. Thus she remains. To her ears, people are speaking. Her mind is a working sponge. Her world started to change, little by little. She no longer laughs as much as before. With her, sleep gets more fidgety. Things that aren't her fault end up getting her an apology. She maintains her unwavering belief that being with him is helping him heal, as she has become nothing more than a conduit for his anguish. She is not living in love. It is a form of emotional control that masquerades as a goal. She goes missing more frequently the more she tries to rescue him. Herein lies the peril of unbridled empathy. A fear of introspection is concealed by a performance of healing. Because introspection entails meeting our shadow selves head-on, which insists that we are only lovable when we rescue another person. If we did this, we would have to face the quiet that we avoided for so long. Instead, we shoulder the burdens of those around us. Let it define us. We'll call it love. However, Jung points out that empathy lacks inherent virtue unless it is deliberate. A siphon if there are no limits. When one is unconscious, it turns into a trance. When we're in that state of mind, we develop feelings for individuals based on their. A wound that never heals reflects a wound within us. We mistake the familiar pain for love's presence. Choosing them feels like picking out a character from a story the soul has told 1,000 times. A narrative in which suffering becomes meaning and value through service. Some of the strongest emotional bonds actually have nothing to do with love. Their origins lie in unspoken loss that is looking for a place to settle. Without realizing it, the empath becomes that safe haven. They sense the mayhem of another and interpret it as a sign of closeness. They experience the allure of pain and refer to it as a bond. But alignment and emotional resonance are not the same thing, and spiritual overreach manifests itself in the form of misdirected compassion. This is where things change. Realizing the difference between genuine connection and psychic entanglement is the first step toward awakening as an empath. Acknowledging when you are being enticed into another person's shadow, not to shed light on it, but to anchor it, is the key. Just because some wounds don't want to be healed. A little discomfort devours focus. Being around someone who will always say yes can be a source of comfort for those who are suffering. Additionally, empaths will always be giving in to their own eraser unless they master the art of saying no. Empathy is not to be shamed in this. Purifying it is the purpose. Moving it away from the domain of involuntary pain and into the holy crucible of free will is the goal. Once the empath has clear vision, they will no longer be captivated by wounds. No longer do they present themselves as a remedy for the heartache of another person's rejection. They hesitate instead. They inhale deeply, wondering aloud, "Is this mine to carry?" Nevertheless, not all of the emotions we absorb originate from the individuals physically present. Like long-vanished winds from an invisible realm, some feelings appear out of nowhere. Some sorrows come unnamed and untold, carrying only their weight. This also begs the question, what if the burden you're carrying is passed down through generations rather than simply from people you've met? Sometimes your inner sadness shows up unannounced. It is speechless and comes without a traceable memory. It floats up from a forest floor instead. Massive, long-lived, faceless. In the stillness of night, when tears well up from someplace beyond your life, or in the mornings when your chest tightens for no apparent reason, you feel it. Nothing in your past provides a satisfactory explanation for its form, no matter how hard you try to label or make sense of it. Here we see the subtle specter of the empath who, unwittingly, carries the grief of their ancestors. Feelings play a role as well. Ancestral resonance is what it is. It usually starts with a state of confusion. Why? For no apparent reason am I experiencing such profound emotions. Still, there's more to the truth than just that question. Your empathy goes beyond that of other people. Generations will feel your pain. The collective unconscious, as Carl Jung once described it, is a huge mental bank that stores all of humanity's experiences, feelings, and archetypes. But there is a personal collective within each of our family trees. The unknown tears, unspoken fears, and unlived truths of our ancestors. These remain even after you disregard them. They surge ahead, looking for a courageous vessel, enough to experience an unfathomable emotion. The empath is frequently that vessel, the one whose guard is already down and whose heart is wide open. Consequently, one's inner life becomes overrun with emotions that don't quite fit in but seem incredibly genuine. Picture this. A woman arrives at therapy inconsolable, breaking down not because of a recent loss, but from an unidentified form of grief. Over the course of the sessions, it becomes apparent that she is not alone in her grief. Never allowed to weep, her mother was a statuesque figure. Tragically, her grandma was betrayed in total stillness. Never again would her great-grandmother speak of the time she was banished from her homeland. Even after waiting 3 generations, she can't hold back her tears anymore. The unheard anguish that has reverberated through her family tree finds its first advocate in her. There is no sign of her crumbling. She's making great strides. This is the unspoken agreement that a lot of empaths take on. Taking on the burden of a family's long-lost history and translating its emotions into words when no one else would. And still not having consciousness, this legacy becomes a weight. When the wounds of your ancestors remain unhealed, you start to perceive the world through their eyes as well as your own. Some men, like those whose fathers were never cared for, have an irrational need for companionship. When a woman tries to speak her truth, she may experience a tightening of the throat, especially if her family history includes women who were silenced. These qualities are not coincidental. They reverberate. If you possess the necessary sensitivity, you might be the first in your family to. Please pay attention. Herein, however, is the paradox. Although they have exceptional perceptual abilities, empaths often don't know how to distinguish between their own traits and those they've inherited. So, to calm the storm within, they attempt to fix the world outside. They take on the role of counselor, healer, and emotional protector. A silent question, though, lies beneath their service. Will my own suffering make sense if I assist others in letting go of theirs? They stray from their core as a result of this unconscious strategy. They start to confuse their long-lasting sorrow over losing their own identity. Furthermore, by doing so, they muddy the waters of their own inner voice. Coming to terms with this reality is a freeing and agonizing process. It hurts because you have to admit that you might not have felt most of those things. That you have a new kind of power when you realize that some of your deepest feelings are borrowed. It's freeing. You get to decide what you want to keep with you. Although empathy is often revered, it becomes necessary to transform it when it is employed to encapsulate generations of silence. Nobody uses you as a closet to alleviate discomfort. Through you, that suffering can be transformed into insight, meaning, and finally, relief. However, the obstacle is still there. Losing sight of who you are is easy when you're carrying someone else's burdens. Reactions start to stem from inherited echoes rather than the present moment. You want to take care of everyone. Stop wasting time and energy on things that aren't broken. Your soul is hardwired to respond to unseen cries, so you step into roles no one asked you to play. Not because you're weak, but because. Still, the tendency to mend itself can serve as a cover that veils your inherent dread of confronting your inner self, a reflection of the passed down sorrow. You try to find redemption by fixing other people, but you avoid facing your own problems. And you start to act when that dormant hurt begins to fester within you, avoiding it in favor of rescuing other people, as if doing so will mend the piece of you that was silenced, is the path to healing. Soundtrack. It sounds admirable at first. At the beginning of every person's journey, you are the one they look to overcome. a calm voice amidst the mayhem. You're there to lend an ear and a shoulder. You have a sense of purpose deep down. People notice you. However, as time goes on, a pain develops within, not from giving, but from never receiving. Underneath your selfless nature resides a subtle dread that you are meaningless unless you contribute, that you risk unraveling if you cease to hold other people together. You keep pouring and listening not out of desperation, but out of fear of what you could lose, determine whether you ever discontinued. It is not through visualizing luminous figures that we attain enlightenment, but rather through bringing awareness to the darkness, as Carl Jung wisely put it. However, when an empath is unconscious, they frequently make the inverse decision. They radiate light and then duck back inside, so they can avoid being alone with their unspoken needs. They adorn the world with kindness. Over time, their kindness becomes an act. Yes, it is a lovely one, but it is still a mask. Someone who covers up there, yearning to be complete rather than useful. A guy in his 40s devotes his days to helping troubled youth. He's kind, patient, and attentive to everyone he meets. You can't help but admire him. A generous man who does not expect anything from others. But there's an eerie silence in the house when he returns at night. Being still is a challenge for him. As soon as he is no longer needed, he starts to fall apart. In an effort to escape the silence, he gets into arguments with his coworkers, works too much, and checks his phone late at night. His sense of self is based on his potent for other people. However, without that role, he feels unnoticed and bare. Part of him worries that he might cease to exist if he is no longer needed, even though he would never acknowledge it. This is the pitfall that a lot of empaths experience. Love and the need to survive both shape them into the healer. They discovered early on that love was something you had to work for, that being seen meant being of service, and that being present meant doing your best. Being indispensable became their life's work. What starts out as a gift ends up being a prison. Tragic irony abounds in a performance that has been performed so frequently that the actors have forgotten they are acting. They give to other people until they can't take care of themselves anymore. They learn to read the suffering of others, but are utterly unable to comprehend their own. This is not a flaw from a psychological standpoint. A pattern it is. A survival mechanism hardwired from an early age when interest was fleeting and value was tied to how much you could help others. In reality, it's just a morally ambiguous survival tactic. Still, staying alive isn't the same thing as being alive. Moreover, an empath whose entire existence is predicated on pleasing other people will eventually lose sight of their true self-expression. This is the spiritual threat. Healing becomes self-destructive when empathy is transformed into performance. Instead of inquiring about how I'm feeling, the empath shifts the focus to what they require from me. As they quietly give up something important to themselves, their inner turmoil gradually recedes. They equate being visible with being able to hold space. However, providing a reflection for other people doesn't imply you have to disappear in a thin air. Therefore, it is not a matter of if you're helping other people, but rather why. Are you giving from a place of abundance or anxiety? Is the fear of being unlovable keeping you from healing, or is love the driving force behind your healing? You cannot accuse me by asking these questions. They are calls to introspection. Choosing altruism isn't always a sign of sainthood. Sometimes it's a reaction to fear, and we must be honest about that. The moment of truth comes when you understand that kindness, becomes a mask of avoidance when you try to evade your own depth. And no mask, no matter how virtuous, can bring about tranquility. Something is missing, you start to feel it, coming from inside rather than outside. That part of you that wants to be, not merely give. I want to be known, not merely strong. The more you sacrifice, though, the more you disappear. At least until the position of healer turns into a prison. You have ceased to exist. You're behaving in a way that doesn't align with your true self. When the music stops, there's a brief pause, almost. Slowly but surely, as the proud role you once played starts to weigh you down. The practice of compassion wears you down rather than any one act of kindness. There is a toll that the continual caring, the never-ending emotional labor, and the silent promise to be the glue that keeps everything together begin to take. Not from a lack of sleep, but from the constant pressure to prove yourself strong. You find yourself waking up exhausted. You have no idea when it started. You're only aware of the fact that, at some point, being sensitive turned into a burden and being empathetic into a prison. The wounded healer complex, so called by Jung, is a psychological pattern in which the urge to aid other people stems from one's own unresolved suffering. Seeking meaning in service and self-discovery through sacrifice, the healer remains oblivious to their own wound. Even though everyone else praises their dedication, they're often silently suffering because they are bound to the image they made. The love that started it all turns into work. The grace that was once there feels more like a self-eraser. Visualize a middle-aged woman. She is the go-to person for remembering everyone's birthdays, bringing soup to sick neighbors, and fielding calls from worried relatives at all hours of the night. Despite everything, she smiles. However, when she's alone, she feels completely unnoticed. She goes unasked for. Even when her voice quivers, nobody pays attention. Her needs remain unspoken. Her exhaustion goes unrecognized, and she harbors an unspoken belief. One must persevere in order to earn that love. The belief that she must be helpful if she wants to be loved. She needs to show that if it matters. Fade away as you attend to other people's needs. This lacks empathy. This is prison life. Culture has always revered the silent sacrificer, the one who burns quietly to keep others warm. So even in captivity, there is a certain air of nobility. But the depth of your love is not determined by the pain you endure. How much you persevere through is not indicative of your true value. You are not loved if you have to bleed to be noticed. You are a tool, subtle but deep. This presents an emotional challenge. When layers of your identity blend. As a caretaker, taking a step back can feel like being abandoned. You are afraid that if you cut off the suffering of others, you will abandon the one true self that has ever found acceptance. What you're actually giving up, though, is the idea that you have to put in emotional work to get where you want to go. Others are not being abandoned by you. This is a recollection of who you are. The archetype of the healer, as Jung saw it, has the potential to consume the self if left unconscious. As a result, pain becomes a symbol of pride, and exhaustion turns into an unusual demonstration of commitment. However, you should not let the process of healing sap your essence. Love is not boundless compassion. For the sake of virtue, it amounts to self-deprivation. And nobody gets better when they're being helped by someone who's going away. Asking the question that most people would rather avoid is the question that will set them free. If I step down from this position, who will I be? At first, the resulting quiet is almost unbearable. Some guilt may wash over you. Maybe you'll feel empty. However, if you persist in remaining silent, and if you give yourself, when you allow yourself to grieve the identity that was formed through excessive forgiving, you will uncover a part of yourself that has been suppressed for far too long, a part that longs to be unneeded. It longs to be recognized. You start to realize that the sacred temple you constructed through sacrifice is now just a place to be confined. No matter how many others it protects, it was never designed to house you. Who you imagined yourself to be is all that matters. However, you are more than just a picture here. It has arrived to the ability to burn, communicate, breathe, and reassume its own identity. Life will force you to make a decision at some point. Either keep soaking up the suffering of others, or, when the time comes, grasp the flame within your own soul, and you will comprehend. Love doesn't necessitate leaving oneself behind, and helping doesn't imply absorbing. After being consumed by the need to prove love through suffering, there comes a moment in every awakening when the empath pauses and breathes. And in that exhalation, a change occurs. A formerly intolerable stillness now starts to feel holy. Setting boundaries no longer brings on the feelings of guilt that used to accompany them. They begin to understand that preserving your energy is not an act of selfishness. It is prudent. Saying no is not mean-spirited. This is elucidating. Submerging oneself in the narrative of another is not love. If it's genuine love, it won't ask you to vanish. Here we are at the threshold. Awakened empaths start to traverse the threshold where compassion is no longer an act of immersion, but of grounded presence. They learn to calm down and stop trying to save everyone. Person bearing witness. They are no longer compelled by shame and start to make decisions based on tranquility. Their feelings have not diminished. Rather, they are more cognizant of their emotional state. No longer do they identify the suffering of others with their own. And in that clarity, empathy is turned into a luminous channel, strong, self-aware, and firmly planted, rather than a porous floodgate. Imagine a guy who, for the majority of his life, was that person on whom everyone could depend. Being the good kid meant never having to worry about meeting his own needs. He grew up in a home where feelings were like storms that needed to be calmed. As an adult, he took great satisfaction in being accessible at all times. By yes, he meant always in his mind, until eventually his body rejected him. No, his soul responded. An overwhelming sense of emotional weariness washed over him as he sat through a family dinner. Stories that sapped his energy made him smile. His counsel went unheeded by those he tried to help. He supported the others in a room, but he was not himself. Nothing dramatic, but the truth burst forth that night. After getting home, he sat in silence while turning off his phone. Amidst that stillness, after decades of avoiding the question, he at last asked himself, how would it feel to love without letting go of who I am? And that was the first step. He remained concerned. The temperature did not drop. Nevertheless, he ceased responding positively when his body signaled otherwise. The pain of giving caused him to stop referring to it as love. When people expected him but didn't value him, he stopped showing up. Also, he was taken aback by a lovely occurrence. There was no power outage. The light improved. Reason being, it wasn't dispersed among 100 unfulfilled anticipations anymore. In its entirety, concentrated, wholly. Most empaths are never told this hidden truth. How much of oneself one is willing to give up is not a measure of love. To respect the grief of another, you must not bear their burden. Nobody needs you to hide so they can shine. Boundaries are not impassable barriers that isolate individuals. They serve as the entrances to your inner sanctuary. There is no disconnection when you draw them consciously. From a place of truth, not trauma, you are choosing to connect. Jung taught that severing components of something does not make it whole within, but by welcoming each one wholeheartedly. Part of being an empath is knowing when to stop talking. The aspect that can tell when a romantic relationship is just a show. That part that wishes they could be someone for themselves rather than everyone else. And by recognizing that empathy isn't the sore spot it formerly was, doing so demonstrates profound spiritual growth. When kindness learns to defend itself, it becomes wisdom. Empathy gains strength when it becomes anchored rather than porous. You start to detect. It is not your place to hold every emotion. You can't always be the hero in times of crisis. No one's soul is worth taking on. See another person's pain without putting yourself in their shoes. Warmth can be provided without exhaustion. Also, you don't have to give in to another person's needs in order to love them. You stop being a sponge when you realize you can love without hiding. Rather than reflecting pain, you reflect the long-lost brilliance. Music in empaths need to heal becomes overwhelming at some point. Starts to erode, not due to animosity, but due to lack of understanding. Like the mist lifting from a mirror, it's a quiet unfolding. You start to realize that your worth was never meant to be determined by your strength, your ability to mend, or the amount of suffering you could endure on behalf of others. Now you comprehend, deep within the structure of your very being. Being a sore thumb for everyone else's problems was never your calling. Your purpose in life was to reflect its glory. Because of that, everything changes. It is at this juncture that the Healer who is wounded seldom anticipates. You were defined by your efforts for a long time. You believed that in order to be welcomed, you needed to make a sacrifice. You thought your generosity was validated by going above and beyond. On the other hand, a new kind of strength emerges as the internal storm subsides, one that can be powerful without rescuing or absorbing. No longer do you feel an irresistible pull toward disorder. Now you know better than to misunderstand someone's need as your own goal. Rather, your mere presence transforms into something completely different, not at all comparable. Restorer, not rescuer, merely illumination. Picture a woman who used to let herself get swept away in each relationship. When no one else would, she would patiently listen, pour out her heart, and carry the burden of emotion. Over time, though, she learned not to equate empathy with duty. Sitting quietly by herself became second nature to her. Calls that exhausted her were no longer returned. When she felt she had to shrink in a conversation, she would walk away. And it was in the little things, not the big ones, that something miraculous occurred. Suddenly, a smile spread across her face. Once more, not as a matter of politeness, but due to a genuine reason. Her laughter came back, this time as a song rather than a performance. People were still seeking her out, but their motivations had shifted. Instead of squatting or taking, just observe, because she had transformed into an uplifting force rather than a source of negative energy that brought out the best in people. When an empath recovers their soul, they undergo this metamorphosis. They halt their pattern of entering rooms in search of healing wounds. Things that do not belong to them are no longer absorbed by them. Despite this, interestingly, once they stop offering themselves as a container, they actually become more healing than before. A mirror that doesn't warp but instead elucidates. They take on the role of a reflection. Jung once said that the greatest gift you can receive is the opportunity to develop into your authentic self. And a presence like this doesn't force people to rely on you, but instead subtly communicates, look, this is what wholeness feels like. The awakened empath starts to grasp this concept. You can be valuable without going through suffering. Being perfect for other people isn't necessary. Do not try to fit in with the shadows that other people have cast around you. Light up the world from the depths of your own being. Doing so makes you an open invitation, not to be rescued, but to go back to who you really are. The martyr vanishes at this point in the journey. The fixer steps back. Something far more radiant replaces the identity based on weariness. You start to live off of surplus rather than deficit. When you're ready to speak, you raise your voice. Only when it's genuine can you give. Also, your love isn't based on depart from oneself, but rather to offer one's completeness. Your healing can then take a more nonverbal approach. It becomes a frequency, a subtle, steady reminder to those around you that you can feel profound emotions without letting them consume you. Finally, the empath can relax, not because their burden has diminished, but because they have given up attempting to claim something that was never rightfully theirs. They have come to realize that their role was never meant to be a comforting figure, but rather a spiritual guide who could reflect the truth and uphold it, not by giving their lives, but by tranquility, not by repairing, but by embodying. In a world that seems to be slipping away, they provide stability. Others start to remember who they are in this silence. It wasn't because the empath revealed their identity. Rather, it was because they silently stood by it. And may the truth be heard more clearly than any words could ever express. Why? Because being valuable does not necessitate suffering. Being perfect for everyone is unrealistic. What heals you is simply being yourself. Musical interlude, a calm tranquility arises when you finally reached a point where you can be yourself around people. There will be no acclaim or celebration for it. It sneaks up on you like the first rays of dawn, penetrating the darkness to reveal what was once concealed. At this point, the empath starts to make a conscious effort to be present rather than avoid pain. Once the container was carefully sealed, the weight that clung to every interaction could no longer find a landing spot. Something more rooted and holy now stands in its stead. Not fortifications, but alignment. Not barriers, but clarity. The ability to stay whole within the world, rather than absorbing it, was your gift, you start to realize. Awakening as an empath does not entail closing one's heart, but rather anchoring it deeply within one's soul. Being fully present while still maintaining one's independence is what it means. Observe intently without fading away. You have finally learned to associate boundaries with acceptance and quiet with warmth. You start to believe that being worthy of genuine love does not necessitate disappearing. It is sufficient to be you in your purest form. Plus, starting with, upon which a different sort of illumination starts to dawn. The calm light of self-discovery, as opposed to the frenzied light of excessive forgiveness. Being a sponge is not your purpose here. Your life is not a metaphor for selflessness. To put it simply, you are a soul that gives energy its significance. You are a threshold, a living thing. When it's grounded in self-awareness, your sensitivity is a strength, not a weakness. In you, sadness can be seen, but not sucked down. The place where people can listen without having their stories taken over. Do not come here to bear the burdens that others will not. Put on weight. Just by being there, you're sending a message that they can handle it on their own. So, if you sense a stirring of this acknowledgement in your heart, take it as a sign. Not too strenuous, not to withdraw, but to stand firmly planted, to feel with discernment, and to consider that embodiment, not absorption, brings healing. There must be light for the world, but you must own it before it can be shared. Wishing you a kind that remains steady like a lantern at night, rather than fluttering in the breeze. Core of who you are. Your presence is whole, anchored, and unmistakably yours. It is not a fragmented light. Post a comment if you felt moved to share your thoughts or feelings, because even a single word may have reflected your own inner experience. Has the presence of that one soul ever made you feel at home? Or are you still on the holy road leading you to your true self? No matter how unfinished your story is, it has the potential to be the light that someone else needs, the sign that they didn't even realize they were looking for. And if you or someone you care about is secretly fighting the delusion that love is always painful, that giving up control is necessary for true connection, or that they don't deserve peace, then you should listen to them. Give them a copy of this video. Please help me communicate with those who need to know that true love does not require us to be small. There is no need to give one's soul up for genuine connection. Plus, the bond we develop with our own self-knowledge is the most important one we'll ever have. Please subscribe and turn on the notification bell before you leave. In this vast expanse, we delve into the depths of human nature, uncovering the intricate web of our unconscious mind and the ways in which each of our relationships mirrors our own personal growth. Leave a comment below if you have any questions, themes, or wounds you would like us to address in upcoming videos. You are the reason this place is alive. We value and greatly appreciate your opinion. Not only did you show up to this video, but you also showed up to the sacred labor of remembering your true self to your inner work. Your spirit will know, not in terror, but in tranquility when the right person shows up. Keep this in mind at all times. However, until then, make the relationship you cultivate within yourself your most intimate. Yes, that is the groundwork. Home is where it's at. All things real originate from that state of completeness. Until our paths cross again, I will be by your side.